Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex sources, really get into the details, and help you get quickly up to speed on important ideas.
And today, we're looking at something truly profound.
Yeah, we're diving into Viktor Frankl's Yes to Life, In Spite of Everything. And honestly, the fact this book even exists is, well, it's kind of a miracle.
It really is. You have to picture the scene. These weren't just, standard university lectures.
No.
Frankl delivered these in Vienna in 1946. That's just 11 months after he was liberated from a Nazi labor camp. 11 months.
It's almost impossible to imagine he'd survived the absolute brink of death, lost almost his entire family, parents, brother, his pregnant wife.
Unimaginable loss. And there he is, standing in front of a Viennese audience. People living in a city, physically scarred, sure, but maybe more importantly, as Frankl put it, spiritually bombed out.
That phrase is so powerful, spiritually bombed out after years of Nazi terror.
Exactly. And he stands there and talks about finding meaning, about affirming life.
And the story of the book itself, it just adds another layer, doesn't it? It was published in German right after these lectures, 1946.
Right. But then, incredibly, it went out of print, largely forgotten for decades.
Just vanished. A work of this depth, until it was rediscovered, republished, and now finally available in English for the first time. It feels like finding a lost treasure.
And think about that original audience. 1946 Vienna. They were starved, really starved for moral clarity, for intellectual sustenance. They needed new ethical coordinates after everything had collapsed.
And Frankl, having been through the absolute worst of humanity, he offered them something, a path forward.
He did. And that title, Yes to Life, it's not just a nice phrase. It has this incredibly deep, almost defiant origin story.
From the camps themselves.
Right.
Yes.
Frankl explains it came from lyrics prisoners would sing, very quietly, sotto voce, in places like Buchenwald.
But the song itself had this bizarre, horrific beginning. I read about this. The commander of Buchenwald actually ordered prisoners to write a camp song back in '37.
That's right. Forced them to sing it. Starving, brutalized people. One survivor even said they put all our hatred into singing it. Just awful.
Yet somehow, for some, those specific words, whatever our future may hold, we still want to say yes to life, because one day the time will come, then we will be free.
Well, they became something else.
They reappropriated it, turned a tool of degradation into this secret anthem of hope, an inner victory, really, a way of reclaiming their humanity against all odds.
Which leads right to Frankl's core challenge to us, to you listening now.
Yeah.
If those prisoners, enduring torture, starvation, forced labor,
Yeah.
if they could find a spark in those words, find a reason to say yes to life despite unimaginable suffering.
Then shouldn't we? Living lives of relative comfort, facing our own, admittedly smaller challenges, shouldn't we be able to say yes to life despite everything it throws at us?
It's such a radical reframing of perspective.
Absolutely. And Daniel Goleman, who wrote the introduction to this new edition, he points out his own connection. He was born around March 1946, right when Frankl was giving these talks.
Yeah. His parents had fled similar horrors. So his own birth, in a way, was this life-affirming act, a response to the darkness they'd seen.
It really underscores how Frankl's words, forged in that crucible, still resonate today. Even if the direct memory of the Holocaust is fading for newer generations, the message feels urgent somehow.
It does.
So that's our mission today. We're going deep into how Frankl, using his own experience and incredible insight, guides us toward understanding this unconditional meaningfulness of life, even facing suffering, illness, death.
Think of it as a thorough exploration of the human spirit's resilience. We want to give you everything you need to really grasp these fundamental ideas.
Okay, so let's start with that first big theme, reclaiming meaning in a spiritually bombed out world. 1946 Vienna. Frankl's standing there. How does he even start talking about things like meaning, value, dignity?
Right, when those very words have been twisted, weaponized by years of Nazi propaganda, how do you rebuild a moral language when the old one feels poisoned?
It's a huge challenge.
Because the Nazi goal was explicit, wasn't it? To systematically prove that human life was worthless. To attack the very idea of inherent dignity.
And Frankl contrasts this directly with Kant, the categorical imperative, foundational stuff.
Exactly. Kant's idea that you should never treat a human being merely as a means to an end. Everything else might have a price, a value, but a person has intrinsic dignity, worth beyond measure.
A crucial principle. But Frankl's observation was sharp here. He said, look, even before the Nazis, things were already going wrong.
Yes, the economic systems of the preceding decades, They'd already started treating working people as, well, mere means.
Like tools.
Essentially, manpower for the economy, valuing output, vital energy over the actual human being. Work wasn't a means to a dignified life. Human life became the means to an economic end.
That really lays the groundwork, doesn't it, for the later horrors?
It absolutely does. He saw this degradation culminating in the mass murders in mental institutions. People deemed unproductive, the sick, the disabled, were declared unworthy of life.
Dehumanization taken to its absolute extreme, reducing people to their utility.
That was the propaganda of nonsense,
Yeah.
as Frankl called it, stripping life of any inherent meaning.
And that phrase, again, spiritually bombed out.
Mhm.
It just captures that post-war Viennese psyche so perfectly. Not just the physical ruin, but the inner landscape flattened.
Totally flattened. And on top of that, this new fear, the atomic bomb. People felt they were living in a new pre-war period, a sense of impending doom.
Like the end of the world was coming.
Exactly. Frankl called it an apocalyptic end-of-the-world mood. He saw it as a kind of historical pattern, this fin de siècle defeatism, this fatalistic idea that big forces, technology, history control everything, and we're just powerless pawns.
Okay, but this is where Frankl flips the script, and it gets really interesting. He argues you cannot rebuild, meaning you can't have spiritual reconstruction if you're stuck in that fatalism.
Right. He actually calls blind optimism and automatic progress reactionary, something only self-satisfied stuffed shirts believe in, this idea that things just magically get better.
So what does he propose instead?
A new kind of pessimism, which sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But it's a pessimism that acknowledges the full range of human capability. For incredible good, yes, but also for absolute unimaginable evil. We have to own both potentials.
And this pessimism, it leads to action.
Paradoxically, yes, because it means we are responsible. Frankl says, each and every one of us determines what and how far something progresses. He makes a key distinction. Inner progress is individual, transformative. Mass progress is often just technical, new ways to build things, or, new ways to kill each other.
So he's calling for sober activism.
Exactly. Clear-eyed engagement. Acknowledge the problems, the darkness, but act anyway. Take responsibility. Not this rose-tinted fatalism that just lets us off the hook.
That sounds incredibly difficult, though, especially for people who had just lived through, well, everything falling apart, all the upheavals and breakdowns, as Frankl put it.
Immensely difficult. He saw that deep disappointment with idealism, how enthusiasm had been abused. Young people especially felt lost without role models. Every slogan, every principle seemed tainted, utterly discredited.
Leaving this kind of moral vacuum.
A wasteland, really. Which led to this nihilism in philosophy at the time, the sense that the world had no substance, that nothing really mattered.
That Frankl pushes back hard against that.
He does. His defiant assertion is, despite everything, what is human is still valid. It boils down to the individual human being, the one who somehow survived amidst the filth of the recent past. Our core humanity, our capacity for choice, endured.
And he uses that stark example from the camp itself.
Yes, the SS commander in Bavaria, secretly buying medicine for prisoners with his own money, an act of hidden humanity.
And contrasted with
The prisoner warden, himself an inmate, who treated other prisoners brutally, sometimes worse than the guards themselves.
it just lays it bare, doesn't it?
Completely. When everything external is stripped away, money, power, health, ambition, everything, you're left with bare existence. You have to confront your essential self.
Or you just become part of the mass.
Right, an interchangeable number. Existence, in that state, becomes a constant decision. Who will you be? The SS man showing secret kindness, or the prisoner giving in to cruelty. It's the individual choice that matters, not the uniform or the circumstance.
So if that's the ground zero for rebuilding, Frankl then talks about needing a new kind of propaganda, right, to fight back against that propaganda of nonsense.
Yes, but a positive propaganda, one that's individual and active, guiding people towards meaning. And he makes a really crucial point here about the very act of asking about life's meaning.
What's the point he makes?
He says that often just asking the question implies doubt. And that doubt, if it deepens, can lead straight to despair and ultimately even to suicide.
That's a really important insight. The question itself can be dangerous if it comes from a place of fundamental doubt.
Exactly. And he really digs into suicide. He looks at 4 potential reasons. 2 he dismisses pretty quickly.
Which ones?
Physical compulsion, like a brain tumor causing severe depression, where it's really the physical condition driving it. And revenge, using suicide to hurt others or make them feel guilty. He sees those as well, deviations.
So he focuses on the other two.
Primarily on tiredness of life.
Mm-hmm.
But he's very clear. That's a feeling. It's not a reason in itself. The real question, he says, is whether life still has meaning, even when you feel utterly exhausted by it. Is it worth pushing through that feeling?
Which requires an answer about life's unconditional meaning.
Precisely, regardless of your feelings. He tells that almost darkly funny anecdote about the man determined to commit suicide but still worrying about taxi fare because the trams weren't running.
The absurdity of it. Being frugal with money when you've decided life itself is worthless.
Right. Frankl says it shows that pleasure can't be the source of life's meaning, because if it were, its absence would logically make life meaningless. But the man's lingering concern about practicalities showed something else was still operating. So lack of pleasure can't take meaning away either.
Okay, this leads us to probably Frankl's most radical idea, the big shift.
This is the core of it, really, he says. It is not we who are permitted to ask about the meaning of life. It is life that asks the questions, directs questions at us. We are the ones who are questioned.
Wow, okay. So our whole existence is about responding.
Responding, being responsible toward life. It's not about finding some grand abstract meaning out there. It's about hearing and answering the specific, unique questions life poses to you moment by moment.
How does that change things? How does that help?
Well, crucially, it removes that paralyzing fear of the future because you don't need to know what's coming. The present moment holds the eternally new question of life. Your task is right here, right now.
He tells that story about the man on Devil's Island.
The black prisoner, yeah. Sentenced to life. On the ship, the Leviathan, taking him there, a fire breaks out. He gets unshackled somehow, saves 10 lives, and gets pardoned as a result.
An incredible turn of events.
And Frankl's point is, if you'd asked that man on the dock in Marseille, facing a life sentence in that notorious prison, does life have meaning? He'd have said no, absolutely not. But he couldn't have known what unique opportunity, what defining act was just around the corner. We never know what awaits us.
So meaning isn't abstract, it's concrete, specific, unique to each person and situation.
Always. It changes constantly. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer. He uses the example of the tailor's assistant.
Right. The young man feeling his ordinary job was meaningless compared to Frankl's work as a psychiatrist.
Yeah, he felt small, insignificant. But Frankl's response was brilliant. He said, it's not what you do or how big your circle of influence is. It's how you fill your place.
Whether the circle is filled out.
Exactly. With dedication, with responsibility. That tailor's assistant, in his specific unique role, could achieve more real meaning than someone famous who wasn't fulfilling their potential. Depth over scale. You are irreplaceable in your own circle.
That's a very democratizing idea of meaning. It applies to everyone.
Absolutely. And it directly tackles the objection about unemployment, too. The idea that work is the only source of meaning.
Which many people feel, right? If I don't have a job, what's my purpose?
Frankl points out, look, lots of people with jobs find them meaningless. They see work as just a means to an end. They find their real meaning in their spare time, hobbies, family, community.
So the unemployed
Actually have an abundance of free time, he argues, to deliberately fill their lives with meaning, maybe even more opportunity than someone stuck in a soul-crushing job.
Now, he's not dismissing hardship here. He acknowledges economic reality.
Oh, absolutely. He quotes the saying, first the grub, then the morals. Basic needs matter. But he still insists on the meaninglessness of guzzling away without any morality, the trap of a purely consumption-focused life.
Ultimately, it's that unshakable belief in an unconditional meaning to life that makes hardship bearable.
That's the bedrock, even when things are incredibly tough.
So let's revisit those 3 paths to meaning he outlined. They seem crucial for finding ways to answer life's questions.
Yes, they provide concrete avenues. First, creative values.
Achieving things, acting, making something, building a bridge, writing a book, raising a family, the doing path.
Pretty straightforward. Second, experiential values. This is about receptivity, opening yourself up to the world.
Experiencing beauty, nature, art.
Exactly, and most importantly, loving other people. He uses that amazing thought experiment about the symphony concert.
Describe that again.
You're there, the music washes over you, absolute bliss, shivers down your spine. In that moment, if someone asks, does your life have meaning? Frankl says the only possible answer is yes. It would have been worth it to have lived for this moment alone.
Those peak experiences, they can illuminate everything.
They really can. And then the third path, often most difficult, but maybe the most profound, attitudinal values.
This is about how we respond when things can't be changed. Facing limitations, suffering.
Precisely. Taking a stance. Choosing your attitude towards unalterable fate, he quotes Goethe. There is no predicament which cannot be ennobled either by an achievement or by endurance. Change it if you can, accept it if you must.
And grow inwardly through that acceptance.
Yes, and hold on. If I step onto my misfortune, I stand higher. Frankl argues, look, suffering's part of life. It's unavoidable. So if life itself has meaning, then suffering must also have the potential for meaning. It can be an achievement.
Like those English Boy Scouts honoring the terminally ill boys.
Exactly. Recognizing their brave endurance not as failure, but as the highest possible achievement. That completely reframes suffering. It's not just pointless pain, it's an opportunity for human greatness.
This connects directly to how he sees death, doesn't it? Not as the negation of meaning, but as part of it.
Absolutely. He argues our mortality, the fact that our time is finite, is what makes it meaningful to act, to choose to use our time responsibly. If we live forever, what would be the urgency?
Death gives life its edge, its value.
Exactly. So death and suffering don't rob life of meaning. They frame it, they make it precious. The length of life is irrelevant, he says.
Like the book analogy.
Right. We don't judge a book by the number of its pages, but by the richness of its content.
Every moment counts because it's unique and irretrievable.
That's the terrible and yet so beautiful responsibility. An hour wasted is forfeited for all eternity, but a moment seized, lived fully, it's rescued into reality, preserved forever in the past. Safe.
Like being stored in a granary, nothing can touch it.
A beautiful image. And he uses the analogy of radium, too. Its physical form becomes energy, radiating outwards. What remains of us is what we radiate into the world, our actions, our influence.
That leads to his act as if imperative. That's a powerful mental tool.
It really is. Live as if you were living for the second time and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now.
Wow. It forces you to confront the potential consequences of your actions before you take them. Intense responsibility.
Totally. And it's not just death. Our finiteness in relationships, our own human imperfections, our inner limits, these also contribute to meaning.
How so? Despair over imperfection.
Paradoxically, yes. He says if you can despair over your flaws, it means you haven't given up on the ideal. You still care about becoming better. That striving is meaningful.
And we're all uniquely imperfect.
Which makes us irreplaceable. He uses that biological analogy. Primitive cells can do anything, but specialized cells, like in the retina, become unique and indispensable because of their limitations and specific function.
So our unique flaws and strengths give us a specific role.
Exactly. But, and this is crucial, that individuality isn't valuable just for its own sake. Like the cell serves the organism, our unique individuality finds its value in serving the overarching whole, the human community.
Individuality for the human community.
Yes, serving uniqueness. Your fingerprint makes you unique, but it's your unique contribution that makes you valuable to others.
So pulling it all together,
Yeah.
Life is constantly questioning us.
Constantly. Life itself means being questioned, means answering. We're responsible for our existence, moment by moment.
And it gets more meaningful the harder it is, like the climber seeking tougher routes.
That's his surprising argument. The difficulty calls forth our strength, our potential. And for religious people, he adds, this feels like a divine mission, sensing the ultimate questioner behind it all.
Ending with that Hebel quote, life is not something, it is the opportunity for something.
Perfect summary. A canvas waiting for us.
Okay, that lays an incredible foundation. Now let's dive into the second part, where Frankl applies these ideas specifically to the unconditional meaning of illness and dying.
Yeah.
This gets really tough, but also incredibly illuminating.
It does. He takes the core idea that suffering can have meaning and applies it to the most challenging human experiences. Chronic illness, mental illness, the process of dying itself.
He starts by distinguishing suffering from illness, which seems important.
Very. Suffering, he says, is fundamentally human. It's part of life. Provocatively, he argues that non-suffering can actually be a symptom of illness in some cases. The inability to feel appropriate human pain signals something is wrong.
Like in certain mental conditions?
Yes. And he's careful with language here. He says we should talk about illnesses of the psyche, not the mind.
Why that distinction?
Because the mind, our core capacity for reason, truth, moral choice, he argues that can't get sick. It can be wrong, mistaken, but not ill. It's the psychological apparatus, the psyche, that becomes ill.
Okay, so even if the psyche is afflicted, the core mind, the capacity for meaning remains.
That's the implication. It remains accessible. He illustrates the inability to suffer with general paralysis, neurosyphilis. Patients lose fear, become strangely content, deny their illness, completely unruffled. Their emotional response is flattened.
He tells that story from the psychiatric hospital admission.
Oh, yeah. The agitated mother and the calm daughter who turns out to be the patient, completely apathetic about being admitted to a lunatic asylum.
His point being, an agitated reaction to that situation is normal. Apathy is the abnormality, the symptom.
Exactly. And he also talks about those melancholy patients who suffer because they can't feel, they can't cry. Their suffering comes from the absence of normal human emotional response. It shows how deeply suffering is tied to our sense of being human.
He then uses his camp experience to powerfully counter the idea that suffering is always negative, always rejected.
Right. He talks about the prisoner's obsessive focus on food, grub, dreaming about it, talking endlessly, an almost animalistic survival focus.
But the best among them
Longed for something more. They yearned for an end to that subhuman state, that degrading focus on just physical needs. They actually longed for proper human suffering.
real human problems, real conflicts.
Yes. Instead of just the perils of an animal, they were nostalgic for their past, meaningful struggles and longed for a future where they could face human challenges again. It highlights how suffering, when meaningful, is part of dignity.
Okay, let's see how those three paths to meaning play out in specific cases of illness and dying. These stories are really impactful.
They are. First, the graphic designer with the spinal tumor. He starts with creative value, his work. That gets taken away by paralysis.
So he shifts to experiential value.
Exactly. Reading, music, discussions, finding meaning in receiving, experiencing.
But the illness progresses even further.
Relentlessly. He loses the ability to hold a book, listen to music, even speak easily. He's pushed beyond experiential value.
Yet in his final hours,
He achieves this profound attitudinal meaning, asking for his morphine early, not for himself, but to spare the nurse and Frankl trouble later.
an unbelievable act of consideration for others right at the end.
Frankl says that single acts surpassed any professional achievement he ever made, meaning found in selfless attitude, even when stripped of everything else.
Then there's the judge who lost his leg. Attitudinal value again.
Yes, he's weeping, feeling life is meaningless as a cripple, utter despair.
And Frankel's sharp question cuts right through it.
Are you planning a career as a runner? It sounds harsh, but it shocks the judge into perspective. His whole meaningful life as a judge, a father, none of that was invalidated by losing a leg. His smile returns. Illness forces a reevaluation, but doesn't have to destroy meaning.
And the woman in the camp, dying of typhus.
Another powerful example of attitudinal value. She's grateful to fate, incredibly, saying the camp forced her to become serious, to prove herself. More cheerful than ever, just before dying.
Embodying Rilke's idea of dying one's own death, making death part of a meaningful life story.
Precisely. And that leads to the patient's letter. The man facing spinal surgery with only a 5% survival chance.
He saw death not as defeat, but as a gift, like the poet in that Titanic movie.
Yes, a gift of fate. An opportunity for a final meaningful act. His fight wasn't for victory over illness, but a final gathering of strength, a last gymnastic exercise of his spirit.
Refusing narcotics, declaring fighting a losing battle doesn't exist for him. It's only about fighting.
While listening to Bruckner and doing math, so unsentimental, so focused, that letter proved to Frankl that this demanded attitude is achievable. People can find meaning right up to the very end.
So, meaning in illness and dying is an internal success, unaffected by external failure, like the body failing.
Exactly. External successes might fade, but this inner fulfillment, once achieved, is permanent.
Yeah.
Once and for always. It completes the life.
He uses those literary examples too, Warfel and Tolstoy.
Right. Ordinary people, seemingly living mediocre lives, who find incredible human greatness and retrospective meaning through their struggle against death in their final days. It elevates their entire existence.
Okay, if even dying can be meaningful, then the crucial question Frankl poses is, who gets to decide a life is unworthy?
This cuts right to the Nazi euthanasia horrors.
Oh.
He completely rejects judging life by practical value or usefulness. That's only for the person themselves to consider, maybe. No one else has that right.
He criticizes medical language too, calling patients a case of, or saying someone is a disease.
Yes, seeing it as objectification, degradation, reducing the person to the illness.
A good doctor needs to shift back to a human perspective. Ask, what would I do in his place?
That humanist discovers and awakens the human in the patient. Asking about usefulness to society is inhuman and therefore unmedical.
Hmm.
The person has an illness, they are not the illness.
And that incredible story of the old woman with hallucinations.
Tormented for decades by voices, yet calm, cheerful, industrious.
Her answer is just astounding.
My God, I just think, doctor, it's still better that I hear voices than if I was deaf as a post. Profound wisdom, an unbelievable attitudinal achievement. She found meaning within her affliction.
This builds his powerful case against euthanasia. He tackles the arguments head-on. First, incurability.
He challenges it fundamentally, citing the young man in complete inhibition for 5 years. Mute, tube-fed, seemingly hopeless.
But then the spontaneous, miraculous recovery.
Completely recovered, returned to his profession, even lectured about his rich inner life during those 5 lost years. Proving incurable is often just a reflection of our current limited knowledge. Who knows what treatments are coming?
And even if we knew someone was incurable.
Who gives the doctor the right to kill? The doctor's role is to save and to care, not to judge being versus non-being. Giving doctors that right would destroy trust. Is my doctor a healer or an executioner?
Then the state's duty argument eliminating the useless burden.
Frankl dismisses the economics as morally bankrupt. A state needing those savings is already finished. But more importantly, usefulness isn't the only measure of value.
Like the comparison with grandparents.
Exactly. Grandparents might be unproductive economically, but they're loved, indispensable. This points to another source of value, being loved. Love sees uniqueness, it's a blessing, not earned by utility.
He extends this to disabled children.
Often cherished with the tenderest love. He shares that mother's letter about her child lost to euthanasia, the child who couldn't walk or speak, but whose hugs made the mother infinitely happy in spite of everything. That's inherent value beyond measure.
And the substitute for suicide argument. The doctor fulfilling the patient's supposed wish.
Frankl counters with his doctor colleague who had terminal cancer. The closer death came, the more fiercely his will to live asserted itself, even denying the diagnosis.
So we can't assume someone truly wants to die, even if they say so in despair.
We simply don't have the right to deny that innate will to live. It often overrides conscious despair.
He even argues doctors must intervene in actual suicide attempts.
Absolutely. He developed methods to save poisoning victims, even when colleagues said he was playing fate.
His response.
The doctor who doesn't intervene when they could, that's the one playing fate. If fate wanted them dead, it wouldn't have brought them to a doctor's care. A doctor must act like a doctor, save and care.
So this whole refutation of euthanasia arguments reinforces the core message.
Unconditional meaningfulness. Life itself is meaningful. Suffering can add meaning. Dying can be meaningful. Illness doesn't negate worth. Meaning comes from answering life's questions through our actions, experiences, and attitudes, our responsible being.
Okay, let's move to the final section. Experimentum crucis, lessons from the concentration camp and the ethics of everyday life. Here he broadens the scope, right, to ultimate meaning.
Yes, beyond just individual lives. Does the universe itself have meaning? He presents 2 options, logically unprovable either way.
Either it's all meaningless
Or it's so profoundly meaningful our finite minds can't grasp it. Ultimate meaning, or super meaning.
And choosing between them isn't logic, it's faith.
A decision from the depths of his or her own being, a leap. But believing in ultimate meaning, he says, has a creative effect. Belief brings into being that which is believed. It shapes reality.
And the experimentum crucis, the crucial test case, is his own camp experience.
Exactly. He describes using that mental trick as prisoner 11104 in Buchenwald, imagining himself giving a lecture back in Vienna about the psychology of the camp.
And now in 1946, he is giving that lecture a full circle.
Incredible. He describes the phases. Phase 1, admission shock at Auschwitz. 95% sent to the gas. The 5% like him, stripped bare, shaved, numbered, reduced to naked existence. A line drawn through your entire past life.
He talks about that tendency towards regression, towards just self-preservation.
Becoming like a herd animal, huddling in the middle of the column to avoid blows. Primitive dreams. Bread, baths, cigarettes. Frankl dreamt of gâteau. Psychoanalysts called it regression.
But Frankl strongly disagreed. It was inevitable.
Absolutely refuted it. He saw countless examples of inner progress. People achieving true human greatness because of the camp, not despite it. Growing beyond themselves.
He also challenged the idea that prisoners inevitably became schizoid, apathetic, and irritable.
He insisted they retained human freedom, the ultimate freedom to choose their response, to overcome apathy, suppress irritability. That inner ability couldn't be taken away, even if they sometimes chose not to use it.
The breaking point came when they lost their inner hold.
Yes, that connection either to the future, hope of liberation, or, for the deeply religious, to eternity, transcendent meaning.
But for most, the future was just indefinite uncertainty.
The most spiritually depressing fact. No release date. Rumors just tortured them.
So therapy in the camp was about restoring that inner hold, that sense of meaning.
Essential for survival. Convincing people their life still had meaning, even there. Applying Nietzsche. Whoever has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. The why makes the horrific how bearable.
And finding meaning even in suffering itself, even in death.
Yes, the meaning of suffering, even pointless suffering, and the meaning in dying one's own death. Taking responsibility to be worthy of the suffering endured.
How did people endure? He uses that vaulted arch analogy.
Right. The psyche strengthened by an extra load of suffering within limits. Many weaklings actually came out mentally stronger.
But liberation was dangerous, like decompression sickness.
The sudden release of pressure was a shock to the psyche. Disillusionment could set in quickly.
He stresses that suffering is unique, incomparable.
Yes. Its magnitude depends only on the sufferer. The key difference isn't amount, but whether it's meaningful or meaningless suffering, which is down to the individual's attitude.
This relates to that claim, I knew nothing, the flight from responsibility.
Exactly. It makes others' suffering meaningless by refusing to acknowledge it. He distinguishes collective guilt, which he rejects you aren't guilty for your nationality, from collective liability.
Like the appendicitis bill. Not your fault, but you're liable.
Precisely. Nations liberated by others' sacrifices have a liability, a debt. Frankl felt his own survival was undeserved mercy, owed to his dead comrades. He had to earn it retrospectively by bearing witness.
That oath he took at the burial site.
A powerful commitment. He knew vows fade, but those post-liberation moments, blessing bread, sleeping in a bed, they remained. Everything became relative.
Survivors felt born again, stripped down to their essence.
Yes, ambition gone. Just this pure urge for essential self-realization.
And all this leads back not to philosophy, but to everyday life.
But action in everyday life, metaphysics of everyday life, seeing the eternal and the temporal, and knowing the temporal matters eternally.
What we do, experience, suffer now. It's preserved forever.
Rescued into the past, into reality, our responsibility is twofold. For what has happened, acknowledging it, learning from it, and for what has not yet happened, bringing potential into being.
Everyday life isn't trivial. It's the ground for action.
It's reality per se. This metaphysics takes us out for reflection, then throws us back in, but consciously, responsibly.
He knows people are often sluggish, avoid responsibility.
Which is why education for responsibility is so crucial, helping people see their unique task.
And his final point circles back to the beginning.
To Buchenwald, to the inmates singing, "We still want to say yes to life." They did it. Under hellish conditions, they affirmed life. Saying yes to life is not only meaningful under all circumstances, because life itself is meaningful, but it is also possible under all circumstances. That was the whole point of these lectures.
To demonstrate that possibility, despite hardship, illness, death, the camps, a yes is always possible.
Yes. An unconditional yes.
So if Viktor Frankl, having endured the absolute depths, could find that yes, could help others find it, could discover the why that made anyhow bearable, the question he leaves us with is unavoidable.
What is the why that life is asking of you right now in your unique situation?
How will you answer? How will your next actions, your experiences, your chosen attitudes shape your irreplaceable life, rescuing it into that eternal reality Frankl spoke of? Something profound to consider.
Thank you for joining us at Wisdom House, where we bring you timeless insights from the greatest books. If you found this deep dive valuable, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom House. Stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next video.